Welcome to part 2 of Sex the Evolution Killer. In order to understand how sex kills evolution, we must understand exactly what evolution is. Let's dive in. What exactly is evolution? The evolution literature is full of buzzwords that leave the average person utterly confused. The scientific method demands clarity and precision in the definitions. Let's consider a Year 10 textbook. There are 2 key words that are missing. See if you can find them. Pause the video if you need to. The first word that is missing is evolution. The second key word, which is conspicuous by its absence, is species. This whole topic falls to pieces unless we have clear definition of these 2 key words. Okay, well, you think that's a Year 10 textbook, that's just elementary. Well, let's consider a Year 12 textbook. Again, we go to the glossary and we look for the word evolution, which is missing, and also the word species. Now, why is this? Why would it be missing? That's a key question. Well, you think I will go to the Oracle, I will go to Mr. Google, and I will ask Mr. Google to tell me exactly what the definition of biological evolution. You go there and Google it for yourself. Go to the first entry, which is at the very top, and read the definition on the right-hand side. And very soon you'll start thinking to yourself, what am I reading here? You know what you're reading? You're reading total and complete equivocation. Let's quickly clarify the issue before showing the evidence. Consider a current infant, which we're going to consider to be generation 0. And if we go back in time, every time we go back one generation, every 30 years, we're going to go back in time, -3, -4, -5 generations, and we're going to keep going back every 30 years, and eventually we're going to reach a point where we need to ask ourselves, who or what were our original grandparents? Now here we're going to have to leave observable science because this has not been observed. We're going to have to consider some possible hypotheses. And the first hypothesis is that we were intelligently designed. Now the evidence for this is speculative or circumstantial, but the key idea is that although we cannot see the designer, we can see the design. And for this reason, over the last thousands of years, people have gravitated to this hypothesis because they open up their eyes, they observe nature, and they do observe design. Birds flying, cheetahs running at 100 kilometers per hour, and therefore they rationally conclude if there's a design, there is a designer. If there's a building, that's proof of a builder. And if there's a painting, there's proof of a painter. This is affirmed in the Bible in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, where it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, male and female, he created them." Now this was the most popular hypothesis believed by 46% of the USA population in the Gallup poll of 2012. In more recent years, a second hypothesis has come to the fore, and that's called macroevolution. And this was popularized by Charles Darwin, and here's a copy of an image from his book where you see the number 1 there. That indicates that the starting point, and from that humble starting point, all the prevailing animals and plants emerged from purely naturalistic forces, no intelligent designer involved. The same idea is represented in this diagram over here, which is very prevalent in biology textbooks. It's called the tree of life. So we start off with a primitive cell, and then the end point is man and other very complex organisms. And again, the Gallup poll of 2012, only 15% of the US population believed that purely naturalistic forces could produce the end product that we observe. There is a third hypothesis, which seems to be a contradiction because they merge 1 and 2 hypotheses together and they say that both are true simultaneously, and they call that theistic evolution. After scouring the evolution literature, the notable definitions for evolution are as follows. Number 1, change over time. Now, this is a silly definition because everything changes over time. Airplanes, cars, hairstyles, but they are intelligently designed. So this is frivolous and silly. A second definition is microevolution, which is minor changes or adaptation of different organisms or animals. Now, we do have the ability to adapt to our environment, and we will note, for example, that animals in very cold climates do have long fur. Okay, no one is contesting this. This is observable, and it just makes good sense. The issue is in the third definition, also known as macroevolution or Darwinism or Darwinian evolution, which basically asserts that all animals and plants and organisms had a common ancestor, something like a bacterium, and most importantly, that the plants and animals came into existence by totally natural, unguided and purposeless processes, and specifically without the involvement of an intelligent designer. This is where the battle is, and this is where we need to examine the evidence. Let's explore macroevolution in a bit more detail. What is the starting point? That's a contentious issue, but most textbooks indicate some sort of primitive simple cell, something like a bacterium. They call it different things. Some people call it a protocell, something like a bacterium. Now, 30 or 40 years ago, they would actually assert that from non-living matter, natural forces was able to produce the first living cell. Now, this is so absurd that they've abandoned it in recent years, and they've given it a different title called abiogenesis. But we're going to be gracious here. We're going to give them a primitive cell, something like a bacterium, but please note that the bacterium does not have a brain, no heart, no lungs, no blood, and the evolutionists assert by applying macroevolution, we have an end product which is us, the human citizen and other complex organisms, with all our complexity of heart and lungs and brain and reproductive system, etc. And they assert that macroevolution was able to produce this end product. Now, what is macroevolution? Well, first of all, they assert many mutations. Now, we'll talk about mutations in a little while. Then we have lots of time and many, many generations of organisms. Then we have natural selection, which we'll define in a little bit more, and natural forces of wind and rain and gravity, and certainly without the involvement of an intelligent designer, they assert that the end product came into existence. Now, is this verifiable? Have we observed this? Big negative, we have not. Is the supporting evidence rock solid? No, it's all circumstantial. So it's a good question to ask is why do we teach it as a scientific fact? For some viewers, a deeper explanation of mutations and natural selection would be helpful. Let's consider mutations first. We notice on the right-hand side the DNA molecule, which contains the design information to build a little baby. Now, the design information is contained in nucleotides, the order of the nucleotides, and the DNA molecule is copied and the information is transferred. However, sometimes the copying process is imperfect, and instead of, for example, a nucleotide being copied, it becomes into a C. That is a mutation. And these mutations are normally deleterious, they normally harm the infant, even kill it. But evolutionists assert that sometimes, not very frequently, but sometimes a positive mutation occurs which bestows a benefit on the offspring. Well, that is what they assert to be the design information coming into the generation of organisms that are emerging. Let's look at natural selection. Natural selection was one of Darwin's unique ideas, a genuine idea that he came up with. And the key idea is that in organisms, if you have a large number of them, there will be some variation. They're not exactly identical, and the differences make some of them more fitter to the environment than others. And the fitter ones will survive and breed, and the ones that are less fit will die off because of the limited food supply. And it's a bit like he mentioned dog breeders, how dog breeders can breed different types of dogs with different attributes. He asserted that natural selection similarly will collect the positive mutations and thereby create totally different and new organisms. Okay, now that we've prepared the ground, it's time to go in for the kill. Thank you so much for watching part 2, the evidence, the smoking gun evidence that kills macroevolution is contained in part 3. Please go there and you'll find it very fulfilling. Thank you again.